Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. We have a unique episode today. Today we're going to do a little pre-race conversation, talk through my racing strategy, my thoughts around this upcoming race, kind of the training, what it's taken to get to this point, how I feel, all that stuff. So, first things first, the race is the Brazos Bend 100. We're less than 48 hours out at this point, and I'm having a ton of mixed feelings, mixed emotions about it. Excitement, kind of like hunger, if you will, like ready to go. We've been in taper mode for the last couple weeks, and when we're doing that, a lot of times the body is craving movement because we've been under such a load for such a long time. It's all it knows. So a little bit anxious in that, but we're, like I said, less than 48 hours out. Right now, it's all about nutrition, hydration, sleep, recovery, staying limber, that sort of thing, keeping your mental game locked in, staying focused. But that's kind of the main focus and where everything's at. There's some logistics that have to take place for something like this. You know, there's people coming into town. Shout out to them. I got a real good buddy named AJ who's flying in tonight. He's coming in from Virginia. He's one of my pacers. He's going for a PR this weekend as a pacer. He's ran the marathon distance, but he's going to go for 32 miles. He just turned 32 a couple days ago, so he's going to shoot for the 32-mile mark for a PR. So he intends on pacing me for about 32 miles. And then my other buddy, Brett Ender, who, if you're a regular on this show, have seen him and heard him, he's coming into town. He's going to pick me up for 16 to 18 miles. So they'll be, a big part of the back 50. First 50 is all on me and God. So that being said, what it's taken to get to this point, man, it's taken some failures. It's taken some lumps. When I first started this journey into ultramarathon over 3 years ago, it was because I'd finished the Ironman and I'd saw Nick Bear, and Nick Bear was signed up for this race called the Rocky Raccoon 100. And I approached it the same way I approached the Ironman. When I saw him do that, I said, well, if this guy can do it, I can do it. And I leaned into it. I trained really hard that first year. I trained for probably about 7 months leading up to that race. I went from a typical running volume of 10 to 20 miles a week. I think we peaked around 50 to 60 that year. About 2 months prior to the race, so about exactly this time, I was running one day. I'd had some emotional stuff that I was carrying around and dealing with, and I decided to go for my long run, and I pushed it a little too far that day. The body wasn't rested and wasn't ready for that type of effort. Ended up hurting myself pretty good and spent the next 2 months just trying to get healthy for this race. This is Rocky Raccoon Attempt 1. And I got my body into a decent place between physical therapy, acupuncture, chiropractor, everything you could possibly imagine. Tons of plunging, contrast therapy. I did everything I could. And I probably showed up to that race at about, we'll call it 65% of my ability at that point. And with that being said, I had a lot of people come into that race. It was a special one. I think the specialists, or the most special part of that race for me, you have to forgive me if I get emotional here, had a close friend that I worked with for a long time. His younger brother ended his life a few months before the race. And when I went there to be with him and his family during that time, I told them that I wanted to use this race to honor him. And so I was going to start and toe that line no matter what. It didn't matter if I would have been 30% injured or 100% injured, because people ask all the time, or they'll say, it's stupid to start a race if you're hurt. That may be true, but I gave my commitment to someone, and man, it was certainly a noble thing to show up for, so I had to do it. Started that. So we got there. Everyone was there. Pacers, crew, my buddy's family that I just told you about came into town. It was special. It brought a lot of us together, and it was a special time. And we towed the line. We started the race, and I knew pretty early on it was going to be a long day. Anybody who's a runner out there, you know that feeling. It's like you give it a go. You start, and you're like, okay, we're going to be grinding for a while here. And you kind of just you settle into that place of this is where we're at, and this is where we're going to be, and we'll see what happens. And so I settled into that place, and I think so at Rocky Raccoon, that structure, what that looks like is 5 20-mile loops. So it came in from the first 20-mile loop, and that's where like all your family and friends are at, your crew, and it was so amazing to see all of them, and that lifted my spirits certainly, but my body was already tanking pretty bad at that point. And so my deal was I wouldn't quit in the chair. I wasn't going to quit in the chair, so I headed back out for the next 20 miles, and that next 20 miles took a good bit longer, but we got through it and got back to the family and crew and friends, and again, lifted my hopes. It's so amazing to have a support staff there. And just the ultra running community, everyone is uplifting. You see all this drama around marathons and these shorter races, and people get upset and angry, and they're yelling because you're blocking the water table, or you got film crews that are trying to follow people around while they're running, frustrating people and getting upset, and everybody's in their feelings. The ultra community is not like that. It hasn't been my experience. Everyone has been beyond pleasant, and I think it's really because if you're out there 20 hours, 24 hours, 30 hours, some of these races 90 hours, you have such a deep love and compassion for those that you see on the course, because you understand intrinsically what they're feeling and what they're going through and what it takes to take that next step. And so you just have love and compassion, and everyone out there is like, great job. I'm proud of you. It's just loving, it's supporting, it's uplifting. And so either way, I got back to the chair at the 40-mile mark, promised I wouldn't quit in the chair, headed back out for another 20 miles. At the 10-mile mark of that 20 is 50, and you could pick up a pacer. I picked up my buddy Will, and I've talked about Will on the show multiple times, but he's one of my close friends, pre-sobriety kind of guy, was around, wasn't involved in the party scene at all, but he was a close friend of mine during that time and a coworker. I picked him up at mile 50, and he knew, I knew it was a rough bout. It was a rough time. But the beauty in that was probably mile, call it 55, 56, something like that. I tapped into a place I'd never been before mentally, and I got a lot out. My body was done. There was nothing in my body physically. My throat was swollen shut. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. But none of that mattered. Mentally, I went to this place where I decided to carve a little bit more out of this pain cave that people talk about. And I ran for probably a mile and a half, legit. It wasn't further than that. It felt a lot faster than that, than I was actually running and moving, but like it was everything I had. I remember that. And I remember the freedom in that feeling of like, okay, I know I've given what I had. And we got back to the chair at 60. And at that point in time, again, I wasn't going to quit in the chair. It was the middle of the night by now. We'd been going for close to 18 hours. And it was a lot of walking, honestly. At that point, I was kind of just trudging along. But we got back to the chair. I wasn't going to quit in the chair, and I picked up my other buddy, Morel. And Morel and I walked out of the aid station, probably made it less than a mile. And I think God sent a message through him that night, and he just looked at me and he said, "It's okay, bro. It's okay." And he told me, he's like, you don't have anything to prove to anyone. Everyone knows who you are. You've shown up and you've showed out. Like, everyone knows. And so I pulled out. At that point, I dropped. So mile 60.7, whatever it was just over 60 miles. I pulled out of the race. Went back to the Airbnb. Body was pretty pretty bad after that one. I had a pretty high fever, lost all my toenails, all the good stuff. And I was sick for probably a week after that race, on top of the physical injuries between my knees and my hips and everything that happened there. And I went and got an MRI and met with the ortho, and the ortho's like, hey, like, if you don't take 8 to 12 weeks off of this thing, like, we're going to have to go in. We're going to have to cut you in, and we're going to have to do some things. And so I sent that MRI to the Austin Marathon, and I was like, hey, can I please get a pass? Like, can we move this till next year? I'd like to run this race, but I just don't think I can this year, given this injury. And the doctor said I need 8 to 12 weeks off. And they basically said, we don't do that. And so I said, okay, well, then I'm going to run your race broken. And I did. I showed up. It was god awful. It took like 5 hours and 50 minutes or something, but finished that. And then I took the running shoes off for about 10 to 12 weeks. And I did a lot of deep reflection during that time, a lot of therapy. And it was rough. It was a hard time. It was eye-opening, to say the least. But I remember, again, this whole journey that I've been on, this process that I've been in. It's like, if you sign up to do something or you agree to do something, you have to keep showing up. You have to keep fighting. And so I decided to re-enter the race and to go into another training block. So this was going to be my second attempt at Rocky Raccoon. This was my redemption race, and I put a lot into that training, and we went at it for, like I said, I'd taken about 12 weeks off, so that put us in May. So we had from middle of May until February to train again. So I leaned into the training, did what I needed to do, but I didn't hire a coach during that period because I was like, okay, I know the programming now. I can basically coach myself. That was my arrogance. And so I did, though. I tried my best, and I would do my running and do what I needed to do. But I just felt like I couldn't stay healthy. It was always something popping up, something happening. And so I went and met with, there's a guy, his name's Rolly, and I need to plug him, Austin Manual Therapist or Austin Physical Therapist. He is a big part of a practice in Austin, and I'll make sure, Austin Manual Therapy, I want to say, I'll make sure and plug him in the show notes. But I'd heard about this guy. I went to go see him. As I've grown in my running, I've leaned way more on the Eastern medicine side and off of the Western medicine. And he kind of brings a unique balance to both. He understands the body really well, but he understands that, like, not everyone wants to go down the Western route. So started working with him. He did some gait recording, if you will. Like he kind of put the camera on me and watched me run. And that was good for me. It was a good opportunity for me to see how I was moving, how I was running. And what I learned in that moment, and this is after 3 years of running, is that I was heel striking every step, which was the opposite of anything I'd ever done in my athletic career. As an athlete, when you're running, you're up on the balls of your feet. You're kind of more quad dominant. You're loaded in that way. You're always leaning forward. And in this ultra type of running, you're leaning back almost. You're kind of trotting. And in that, I was heel striking every step. And the body's not necessarily designed to absorb load that way. So the load was coming up through everything in my feet, my ankles, my knees, into my hip. And it wasn't transferring load very well. So this was about 3 months before my next 100-mile attempt at Rocky. And I decided to change my entire running form. I was like, well, I want to do it the right way. I want to learn how to run the right way. So I transitioned into this new foot strike, if you will, which was risky because all the volume had been built through heel striking, but I knew I could only get so far with that. So I transitioned into this new foot strike, and it was at this time I hired another coach, Matt Johnson. It was around December. And Matt, I kind of went to him and was like, hey, this is where I'm at. This is my goal. This is why I'm doing it. You just give me the roadmap. I'll show up and do the work, and we'll see what happens. So he did. He gave me the roadmap. My volume grew tremendously just in that couple months. I mean, I'd never ran a 100-mile week at that point, and it was a big deal to do a 100-mile week. And so I was able to do that. and taper into this race. And honestly, I felt pretty good going into it. I probably was closer to, at that time, to 85% of my capacity at that time as far as health. And so, I felt pretty positive about it. I was like, all right, this is going to be the year. We're going to get it done. And so I show up, and we're kind of working through everything and getting ready for this race. And no lie, like a 10-year, 20-year flood comes the night before the race. And there's water. And this isn't an excuse. I'm just telling you what happened. And there's, standing water, running water, quad high, thigh high on multiple parts of the course. It's a trail, so it's nothing but slop. But at those races, it's cool because if they do them, everybody's under the same set of circumstances. So there's no excuse. And there was people that finished that race, so it wasn't like it was impossible. Either way, show up, start that race, make it to about the 20-mile mark, maybe just north of the 20-mile mark, and slipped. And when I slipped, because every step was like, you're sliding a little bit anyway, and the surfaces are obviously uneven because it's a trail. But when I slipped, I felt something in my groin, and I was like, oh boy. And the only thing that was relieving pressure off of my foot strike at that point for my groin was if I went back to a heel strike. And so I went back to my heel strike, and I was like, all right, the goals quickly transitioned from finishing to beating the previous year. It's like, that's what has to happen. I have to show up and do that. So I leaned into that pretty heavily. I went from 20 to 40. I was doing all right with the heel strike, but, I could feel it start to transfer to my hip, and it was starting to hurt pretty good. 40 to 50, same thing. Picked up a pacer. It was between 50 and 60. It got rough. And at that point, I got back to my chair at 60, and I was done. I was like, I'm done. I'm not taking another 12 weeks off running because I'm not going to injure myself in the same way. And that 12 weeks off of running was honestly pretty debilitating for me. It was rough. And I didn't want to do that again. So I made a decision. I was like, I wanted to pull out at that point. I had another buddy, Will, was there again. He's like, no, we got to beat last year. Let's just get to the next aid station. I said, okay. So we did. We got to the next aid station, which is at about mile 64, 65 at Rocky, and got food. And then the crappy thing about Rocky is, you have to walk out of the woods no matter what. So if you go back in, you got to walk out. And so we had to walk not too far, but it was probably half a mile, 3/4 of a mile to get out of there. And so we got out of the woods and got picked up and went back. And you want to talk about reflection. I had a lot to reflect on because I'm like, okay, I've just given 2 years of my life to this, and I fell short again. And it wasn't Mother Nature's fault. It was nobody's fault. I fell short. And so remember, we got back to the Airbnb, I had a conversation with my crew and some tough conversation. A lot of it was like, all right, is this it? Do we really need to keep trying to do this? And I think I knew that night that wasn't it. I started this thing to prove something to myself, to anyone who's ever doubted me, to anyone who's ever believed in me, to God, to the devil. That's why I started this journey. And throughout the course of this year, knowing I was going to lean back into it, I kept working with Matt Johnson, and I'm going to get emotional, so I might as well get over that part now. I just told Matt, I was like, I'm all in, bro. Whatever you need me to do, I'm going to do it. And I was able to get back running pretty quick after that race. I was able to lean back in pretty fast. And we built some crazy volume. I mean, multiple 100-mile weeks. I've talked about August on here. August was a 400-mile month. But I literally went all into it. And the goal didn't become about finishing anymore. The goal became, we're going to beat this thing. We're going to beat it down. I'm going to show up. We're going to show out. And the reasons just got deeper and deeper as time progressed. So during this process of getting back into training in April, I was back home. I was in a speaking engagement at the high school, and I realized with some of the questions I was being asked and some of the kids that were reaching out that, again, this wasn't about me. if they're looking to me to show up and push through, and I'm preaching this message, well, I better do it. I better show up and I better push through, because if I'm the person they're looking to do that so that they can do it, I can't quit. I can't stop. I can't slow down. So deepen the purpose behind it in April. And like I said, we trained hard through the spring, through the summer, into the fall, and early fall, late summer. This idea or concept of Brazos Bend 100 came up because Rocky Raccoon was already on the calendar. I signed up for it as soon as it was released. There was no doubt I was going back there to get redemption this year. But there was an opportunity to run Brazos before. It's a different course than Rocky. It's honestly flatter, less technical. So really it's about just going out there and getting the distance. And it's a faster race, or it should be. So signed up for it. It's like, okay, we're going to do Brazos, then we're going to do Rocky, and then we're going to do the GOAT in Roanoke, Virginia. We're going to do all three of those races, and it's in about a 5-6 month span. And then I'm going to wrap my ultra career up. And so that's how Brazos popped up. It was literally out of the blue. It was random. And, I can't even fathom at this point in my life where I would be without ultra running. It's given me so much. It's taught me so much. It's taught me to show up for myself. It's taught me to show up for others. And what a blessing that is. And it doesn't always show up in the best ways. But it's given me so much, and I want to repay the sport what it's given me by giving it the honor it deserves. And that's part of the reason I trained so hard this year. Not that I didn't train hard in previous years, but this year is just next level. So I'm headed into this race, and yeah, there's like this level of nervousness, if you will, of like, I still haven't done that distance. Can you do the distance? Can you finish the distance? Will you finish the distance? But really what it is for me is I have so many reasons to keep going now. I can't foresee a reason I would stop. And, that scares a lot of people that are close to me, and they don't understand it necessarily, and I get that. But I want to show these kids that I told you about that you have to keep going. You have to. You have to lean in. There can't be a reason where you quit, where you just give up. And so that's what I'm carrying into this weekend. But, I tell people this all the time. God, the devil, our universe, everything going on, like it doesn't necessarily care what your plans are or how you want to focus or how you want to feel. Life is still going to happen. And this has been a tough week. I'm going to shoot it all the way straight. This has been a tough week. But it's all by design. And I keep having to go back to that and lean into like, that's not in my control. These different things externally aren't in my control. What's in control is what's within me and how I show up. And so we're going to show up to this race and we're going to tap into something we've never tapped into. And it's going to be something. It's going to be something. I don't have fear around the distance. I don't have fear around failure. I don't have fear around feeling shame. We're just going to show up and you'll see the rest. And if you don't hear from me again, you'll know I left it all out there. I don't mean that to be over dramatic. I'm just telling you where I'm at with it mentally and how deep I'm willing to go. That being said, I look forward to following up with you guys after the race. If you follow me on social media and you've noticed a downtick in my interactions on there the last few days, it's honestly because I've pulled away from that. I really want to give this thing everything I got, and I want to be able to show up for everyone who showed up for me on this journey. And so, this race is for everyone, and I'll name names right now, but this race is for the Coon family. That was the family that I told you about for the first Rocky Raccoon. This race is for them. This race is for my mom. This race is for me. This race is for those kids that I told you about that I get the opportunity to go talk to and share my life story with and hear their life story. This race is for anyone who's ever doubted themselves or their situation or been through a tough time. And this race is for everyone that I love, that have shown me unconditional love as I've grown as this person, and I'm still continuing to grow. And I've received so much unconditional love. It's almost hard for me to express my gratitude for it. And I think I've gotten caught recently in a lane of not being as grateful as I should for what I actually have in life. And man, God's given me so much. And I just want to lean into that, and I want to show up for all of that this weekend, and I'm excited to do that. And I'm excited to follow up with you guys after the race. But I don't want to sit here too long and talk through this and talk about it, because there's only one thing left to do, and that's to show up and toe that line and send it. And that's what I'm going to do. So with that being said, that's going to wrap it for this brief conversation on the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. I look forward to talking to you guys soon. I love you.